I'm delighted to have the honor of thanking Peter Armstrong for his services to the accounting community, especially since he's not here and can't respond in his usual cantankerous manner. I'd like to begin with a poem, of course, a very radical extract from a poem that seems to be appropriate to introduce Peter Armstrong. A ray of courage to the oppressed and poor, a spark though gleaming on the aloes earth, that through the tyrant's gilded dome shall roar, a beacon in the darkness of the earth. A sun which o'er the renovated scene shall dart like truth, where falsehood yet has been. That's from Percy Bysshe Shelley, and of course Shelley is always good in a northern accent. There are three kinds of accountant. Those who can count and those who can't. And Peter, thank you very much. Yeah, I have my placemen, you know, thank you very much. And Peter counts, of course, in a different sense, as someone who, in his radicality and difference, and in his strong Marxist perspective, introduced something different into accounting that has facilitated possibilities for others and made it possible to say that we have still some academic freedom. Of course, his later experience at Leicester may suggest something different. Peter contributed hugely to a Marxist approach to accounting, and he was well recognized in this respect throughout his career. Actually, Peter's cantankerous nature and his Marxist nature go back a long time. You know, when he was a secondary school pupil, his school had a visit from the local radical politician who came into the class one day to give a talk. And he started his talk by saying, "My priorities are these. My first priority, Marxist praxis. My second priority, Marxist praxis. My third priority, Marxist praxis." And so there's a little boy put his hand up in the class. And he said, "What do you want to say?" And he said, and it was Peter Armstrong. And he said, "I agree with your priorities, but do you have to have them in that order?" You know, Marxists have a tendency to face that challenge of humanist or humanistic agency and a kind of inevitability thesis. But I can confirm that Peter Armstrong had a very strong humanist perspective, a very strong care for others, a very strong concern when, for instance, in relation to postmodern theory and post-Marxist and post-structuralist theory, he had a strong sense of being frustrated and a strong sense that these were obstacles in the way of enlightenment and progress. And I can remember many conversations with Peter Armstrong of that nature. Peter also never lost his northern accent. I believe he came from Crewe. I always thought he was from Yorkshire, but he did have that very strong accent, which unfortunately I have kind of lost. I mean, I don't really sound like Peter Kay, do I? But Peter managed to keep his accent. He could be very strong-headed. It's a bit like that story about Brian Clough. You know Brian Clough, the famous football manager, when he was manager of Nottingham Forest. And one day he was looking up at the sky when Forest were playing, and one of the directors eventually came to him. He said, "Brian, we're really worried about you. You're just looking up at the sky." And Brian turned around and said, You do your job, I'll do mine. No doubt Peter can upset or could upset authorities, and his appalling treatment at Leicester is well known, and a reminder of the fragility of academic freedom in Britain today. And just because David mentioned that I should say this to upset Stuart, I couldn't help but reference that front cover of Slavoj Žižek's famous book, where he has a picture of Lenin peering over a newspaper, and the title is, "Did Somebody Say Totalitarianism?" Anyway, he didn't laugh. Okay. Very deep, that one. Very deep, that one. Anyway, Peter Armstrong is crucial, very important for anyone interested in a Marxist perspective on accounting, especially in a micro-organizational context. It's a major contribution that is a beacon to academic freedom in Crewe, Yorkshire, and beyond. Thank you very much.
Peter has prepared a little thank you video.
Good evening. I'm Peter Armstrong, and this is my thank you for the Lifetime Contribution Award which you have given me. If you don't mind, I'm going to read from a prepared text. They say Louis Armstrong didn't improvise in his old age, and I'm not going to try it either. The first thing I want to say is I'm hoping that nobody thinks that an award from the British Accounting and Finance Association means that I've made a lot of money. I haven't. The second is that I'm very grateful. It's now 13 years since I retired and became Professor Emeritus at the University of Leicester. To be remembered after such a passage of time is very gratifying. And to receive an honour such as the one you have given me, even more so, particularly since I am no longer Professor Emeritus at the University of Leicester. The reason will probably become clear in a moment. As some of you may be aware, and one or two of my co-workers have been rather too fond of reminding me, I am not an accountant. I am an economic migrant, a product of the sociological diaspora. This means that my contribution has been to the subfield of critical accounting rather than to its mainstream. And I want to say a few words about the situation of that subdiscipline. Critical accounting has come a long way since Anthony Hopwood first persuaded the newspaper magnate Robert Maxwell that Pergamon Press should publish a journal that would subject accounting to critical scrutiny. Maxwell, of course, was a crook who was later to plunder his employer's pension fund. An urban myth has it that this was the reason he agreed to Hopwood's proposal. However this may have been, the first issue of Accounting, Organisations and Society appeared in 1975. Yet only 16 years later, a plenary at the 1991 Critical Perspectives Conference could conclude that critical accounting had become an established part of the Academy. To all appearances, this onward march has continued, with the incorporation of many of its once niche preoccupations into the mainstream. I'm thinking here particularly of social and environmental accounting, but there are other examples. Until recently, one could have said the same of critical management studies, and therein lies a warning. With its house journals, voluminous books of readings, an established pantheon of luminaries, this appears to be similarly embedded in the syllabi and research programs of our most prestigious universities. Or so one would have thought until the events of 2020 and 2021 at the University of Leicester. There, a combination of ideological hostility, interpersonal vendetta, and sheer ignorance, acting through an apparatus of command which had been surreptitiously centralized over the years, succeeded in wrecking a world-leading centre of critical thinking on management and organisation, which had been painstakingly put together by Gibson Burrell. "We can't be good at everything," declared our new Vice-Chancellor, and, as if intended to prove it, he unveiled a cunning plan called Shaping for Excellence. The one concrete proposal within what was otherwise a formless mishmash of consultant speak and unfocused aspiration was that the university should disinvest in one of its existing areas of excellence, namely the aforesaid critical work in its business school. Attempting to explain the rationale behind this act of self-harming vandalism, the Dean of College set an appropriate tone of farce, informing the academic world at large that sociological perspectives have no place in the study of management. Of course they don't. Sociology asks questions of social institutions, and we wouldn't want that in a university, would we? Academic staff in the business school discovered that critical management studies would henceforth be treated as thought crime, and those suspected of committing it found themselves amongst 145 potential redundancies. Dozens left in disgust, while those who attempted to tough it out found their curriculi vitae pored over by a review group of academic witch sniffers who were prepared to do whatever dirty work was required of them in the expectation that their careers would prosper. This preliminary screening was followed by a series of personal interrogations, which even these creatures of Management Central found to be an embarrassment. In my possession, there is a transcript of one of these sessions, and it is hard to believe the depths of craven self-abasement to which the inquisitor sinks as he seeks to ingratiate himself with his victim in an apparent attempt to excuse what he is doing. In order that the larger injustice might be justly administered, and thus stand some chance, albeit a remote one, of surviving the scrutiny of an industrial tribunal, an objective basket of indicators was produced in order to detect the presence of critical management studies in the thinking of the accused. Amongst those indicators was publication in such organs of sedition as Accounting Organisations in Society and Critical Perspectives in Accounting. And so it came about that the University of Leicester hosted the absurd spectacle of some of its leading scholars being lined up for the chop, having published in two of the most prestigious journals in their field. The final irony was that few of those who lost their jobs were actually practitioners of critical management studies. But then, it is one of the strengths of ignorance that it is not impeded by fine distinctions. None of the old women burnt as witches in Northern Europe were actually witches either. But I must not allow the absurdity of what happened to distract me from my main point, which is the precarity of scholarship in the managed university. If a Mad Hatter's Tea Party, like the one I have described, can happen in a once respectable university like Leicester, it can happen anywhere. It can happen anywhere and to critical research of any kind. Well, as you can see, I'm an old man now, and whatever battles lie ahead in our universities, they will not be mine. So thank you once again. Keep on doing it, and be careful out there.